About 2:45 this morning, this FENA service station at 2301 Cedar Springs was the scene of a burglary. But the events that followed caused this to be no ordinary burglary. It resulted in the death of one young boy and a murder charge filed against a Dallas policeman.
I think at times you tend to take things too personally in a situation like this. That's the way I feel now. It's hard to understand what would cause a man to do something like this. It's hard to explain, and it's hard to accept. It's happened though, and we have to do the best with what we can at this particular point, and take whatever action is appropriate and try to correct the situation.
Mr. Clay, can you tell us what happened?
Above all, the responsibility at 3 o'clock in the morning. The preliminary investigation revealed enough evidence to charge the man with murder. And some hour to an hour and a half later, that charge was changed to murder with malice. The man has been arraigned, and that's all we can do now. The next step in the legal procedure that I'm looking forward to, and all of us should be looking forward to, and that is to look forward to an indictment by the grand jury, and thereafter a speedy trial and a just conclusion to a terrible case like this. Como lo veo yo, no es cosa. Now, when we talked about going before the city council, I don't think it was recommended. Well, let's just say that I consider that my primary responsibility. I want to make sure that we let our police department give them an opportunity to react to the situation. And up until now, as I said, I'm satisfied that everything that can be done is being done. Now, there is the next step that I'm looking forward to is making sure that the grand jury returns an indictment so that the man can be brought to trial. Well, I'm very pleased up to now. The man has been arraigned and he's been charged with murder with malice. And as far as I'm concerned, they're doing all they can. It's a terrible display of poor judgment that I can imagine on the part of a police officer, and I just hope that we don't indict the entire police department on the basis of one irresponsible act. On the other hand, I want to assure the community that everything is being done so that this case is brought to trial as soon as possible.
Charges will be placed against Officer Darrell. We feel that the action on his part was completely uncalled for, unjustified, and illegal, and as a consequence, we are preparing criminal charges against him at this time. He has been stripped of his credentials as a member of the Dallas Police Department, and he is now being notified of his indefinite suspension as a member of the Dallas Police Department. As far as we know, there was no attempt on the part of the deceased to escape or to get away from the officer.
Chief, was there actually a burglary at the station?
We're still looking into that. I understand that we have gathered a good deal of physical evidence at the scene, and we should be able to be more conclusive in that respect in the very near future.
What kind of a record does Officer King have?
I cannot comment upon that again, in fear that I might jeopardize his own defense, and I don't want to do that.
Well, I should hope that the Human Relations Commission will make an intensive investigation of all of the facts surrounding this tragic incident, and that they cooperate with the city officials and with the county officials to get to the cause of how an incident like this can occur, so that maybe this boy's life will not have been wasted, that there will be some positive reaction to this tragic thing.
What do you mean by the cause? It's been alleged that a Dallas police officer shot the young boy in the head.
Well, from what I read in the paper, it appears that he was involved perhaps in another altercation involving the death of a young black American several years ago. It seems that perhaps certain policies could have been instituted to see that this wouldn't happen in the future. There's been talk, of course, in law enforcement circles in terms of subjecting all police officers to psychiatric examinations and psychology and sociological examinations. I'm not sure that the city of Dallas has these kind of regulations, and if we can get to the root cause of these problems, maybe we can avoid this in the future. No, unfortunately, I don't think that it is an isolated instance. What concerns me as much as Rodriguez's death here is the fact that had he not died, had the gun not exploded, perhaps his Fifth Amendment rights that he was exerting, his constitutional rights, his rights that are given to him by the state of Texas, would have all been washed out, and he would have perhaps confessed to something that he may or may not have been involved in. And we don't know how many times that happens, because we rely on the police department and police officials to enforce the law. I don't believe that if the situation had been reversed, that is, if Rodriguez had shot the police officer, that he would be out on a $5,000 bond. And I think if anyone just checks any of the records in the courthouse, they'll see that you don't do that. And I would hope that the district attorney would move when it's within his jurisdiction to require an appropriate bond, maybe a $50,000 bond, something like that.
What's the general attitude of the Mexican-American community today following this incident?
Extremely shocked, upset, incredible to believe that something like this could happen. Anger, justified, I think.
The police came. They knocked on the door and they came inside and picked me up. Me and my brother. They woke us up. And then they took us into the squad car. One squad car. They came in two. And then they said that we ran away from the police and something like that.
Did you?
We didn't. We never were down there at the fill station. They said it looked like me. He took it out. He was what do you call it? He took out rolling the
chambers.
He saw inside of it. He stopped it and looked inside of it. It had around three or two bullets in it. He closed it back down and he pointed at my brother's head. He told him to tell him the truth, and he said that he said the truth, except that he clicked it once, he didn't fire. The second time I told him that this time it has a bullet in it. He clicked it and it fired and it blew his side of the face. The bullet went right through him, through the side of his ear from the bottom.
What did you do then?
I was trying to knock the gun out of his hand, except that I was cuffed up in the back. Hardly nothing.
What?
Hardly nothing.
They were taken from an 84-year-old grandfather who has a great difficulty communicating in English. They were taken without him understanding exactly why they were being taken. They were not given the opportunity to dress or even put their shoes on. They had to be awakened in bed in order to be taken out to the scene of the alleged burglary. The other question is it common practice to take a 12-year-old or teenagers involved in or that are suspect in crimes like these out to the scene of the burglary and interrogate them, handcuffed, at 3 o'clock in the morning?
I believe that there is an awakening as well in the Anglo community with this incident. There are questions that are being voiced not only in the Mexican-American community, but in the Anglo community as well. For example, why is it that everyone has to be interrogated in such a manner? Is this truly the system of interrogation that is being used by our police department?
I think there's probably more Officer Canes in the force, and I think this has to be a tremendous concern of the community at this point.
So at this point, the only new information that I think would be of interest to you is the fact that we are with the district attorney at this time, trying to give him the information he needs so that it can go before the grand jury, and we're hopeful that it'll do that today or tomorrow at the very latest.
The victim.
Public safety, both fire and police.
That will come from the community itself through those and I'll just
And any other activities that this committee desires
to convey to you those questions that have been asked. The majority of the calls were for the Mexican American community, but as of
our community realizes that we're no longer
the questions that
in general
that is required.
There are ideas from the community and evidence that we should receive, analyze, and then make comments upon. How many of our people are unnecessarily handcuffed? How many of our people have complained to your Internal Affairs Division about their wrists being cut, about their wrists aching for several days because of unnecessary handling by the police department?
But this is a very, very serious thing. Is there that much difference between people that this attitude, that a dual attitude still exists among the force? And I don't want to condemn just the police department, because I do think it's a societal thing. But that attitude, that dual attitude, the dual treatment of individuals, whether they live off Forest Lane or whether they live on Harwood or North Pearl, has to change.
We agreed that from here on in, until we appointed the new judges and until strong guidelines were developed for handling felony cases, including murders, etc., Any city employee, police officer, what have you, who's arrested, charged with one of these felonies, will be immediately brought not before a city magistrate, but before a district judge or a county court judge.
Do you feel that you would settle with a charge less than murder with malice?
No way.
Because I feel this man is a professional murderer.
We've been fooled before, and this, like I said, we're going to get our answers Monday, and we'll take it from Monday afternoon to see what other procedures. Either we have to stay in the city council chambers and we all get arrested, or what, that remains to be seen.
This action says, and is intended to say as clearly as possible, we police officers feel and know that our fellow officer did wrong, and we have and are gathering the evidence to prove it. It says we're responsible for the rights and safety of all citizens, whether in and out of police custody. It also says as loudly as possible and as convincingly as possible to all other officers that this conduct is not and is not, it was not then, and it will not be tolerated by this organization and the Dallas Police Department.
We accept responsibility. We are willing to work through the process of law, and we're not a community that is transient. We believe in Dallas, and we love our city, and we respect our officials as much as anyone else, and perhaps a little more, for we have learned that Dallas is a place where we can grow our families, respect our neighbors, and also respect the law.
Of course, we are very hopeful that during the meeting tomorrow that the responsible citizens, I hope only responsible citizens attend to begin with, and we're hopeful that those responsible citizens who do attend themselves act in a fashion that will help to lessen any potential problem that might otherwise develop. I'm hopeful that the meeting, if it takes place, can do so with a good deal of proper action on the part of everyone, and that it will be a positive meeting with no outbreaks of violence of any sort.
The demand for justice in the public meeting at noon Saturday to support the criminal justice system by the Mexican-American community is a constitutional right and was officially approved by the city. A meeting with community leaders on Saturday morning showed that good progress was made in finding and removing the root causes of dual standards and insensitivity in the criminal justice system. The City Council commends Council Member Pedro Aguirre and the responsible Mexican-American leadership for the efforts and cooperation in promoting improved communication and understanding in the community since the tragic incident of last Tuesday morning. Once the organized meeting was concluded by members of the Mexican-American community leadership, a small group of opportunists demanded that the marches be expanded through downtown streets and heaped abuse on bystanders and Mexican-American community leaders. A disturbance followed. Members of the Dallas Police Department showed outstanding and commendable restraint. Several were injured.
The administrative staff and the police leadership unequivocally report here, and we state and we affirm that what happened in the hours of the darkness on that Tuesday morning, on the 24th of July, was wrong in every sense, morally, logically, legally. Furthermore, this tragedy was the outgrowth of action which was contrary to our deepest convictions, our most treasured values, at the expense of our most treasured values. It was inconsistent with our every effort at an example.
Response to that, Mr. Chairman. Officer R.R. Arnold states he heard a noise at the rear of a service station. Well, I've already been asked that question several times already about whether or not I felt now in hindsight that my decisions were proper under the circumstances, and I feel perfectly comfortable with my decisions. The decisions I made were based upon the best information I had at hand at the time they were made, and they were based upon the fact that I was making a decision which I felt was for the good of this community. I do not feel bad about those at all, even in hindsight. If I had the same thing to do over again with the same information available to me, I would make the same decisions again. I stand on my decisions, and I'm not apologizing to anyone for those that I made. I think the officers in this particular case, based upon the action that did occur, acted with remarkable professionalism from every standpoint. And if anyone in this community, group or individual, has any feelings that my group can't act as a group in a professional fashion, I think their very actions yesterday should dispel that without any doubt. Now, we are very deeply involved in trying to identify through those photographs all of the people who actually committed some violation of the law. And we're going to file cases against those that can be identified. And I would expect the community to stand ready to assist us in identifying those law violators so that we can prosecute vigorously those that committed some violation of the law.
Yes, the second march was a catastrophe. After the first march, the cadre of leadership went to different parts of the city. Some of us stayed at the city hall. Some of us went back to see what was happening. Others went home. When I personally was with Councilman Aguirre, we drove down to Kennedy, and all of a sudden we could see a couple of hundred people marching up on Main Street again. And at that time, we of course dispersed into the crowd and started talking to people. But by that time, it was another type of segment of the community that was marching. It was a lot of young people, quite a lot of drunken people by that time, a lot of onlookers who were just rabble-rousing, a lot of people from outside of Dallas, and they were completely out of hand by that time, and no one could affect them. No one could influence them by that time. Well, those officers were in a very precarious position, and we asked for them to be there, and they also did an outstanding job. And I told a couple of them personally. And by the way, a lot of them did disperse into the crowd and talked a lot of people into not participating. But it was, again, that handful of agitators, combination of things, that did all the damage. So I think it was a combination of things. I think it was a combination of rabble-rousers who were out there just for the purpose of creating havoc, and compounded with the emotionalism of people anger and hatred that people had at that moment, and it was rather spontaneous. I think what resulted was a spillover into the streets. Well, the police action was just incredible. They served under restraint. I saw no cases of police brutality. The police took tremendous abuse by a lot of these disruptors, the people who were intoxicated or just out to hurt people. And I have only praise for those policemen that I was with, and I was right in the middle of the tactical squad.
Now, if Chief Dyson complies with what he says he's going to do, I think that there will be many issues settled. And I think he's trying to do the best. I think he's a good chief of police. No, I think that Councilman Aguirre is trying to do the best he can. I think yesterday was uncontrollable by anybody. I don't think there was one man or 2 or 3 men that could have controlled the crowd.
Officer Arnold failed to report the full facts of this incident as required by departmental policies and procedures. This suspension is not for any improper conduct relative to the subsequent arrest and death of Santos Rodriguez. He cannot be held as an accessory, as an accomplice, or as a principal to the charge of murder. But those are questions that will be decided in the proper course of action in the proper legal body, within the proper legal body.
It was about 2:45 this morning when a Dallas policeman passed by this Phoenix station here at 2301 Cedar Springs and spotted a couple of young boys in the act of burglarizing the station. The chain of events that followed spelled death for one of the boys and a murder charge lodged against a Dallas policeman.
I probably will have an announcement to make concerning his status at 4:30. Okay?
Where's Bernie go? Are they still meeting?
Well, we discussed with Chief Dyson the problems we thought that occurred on Saturday, which caused us to want this meeting, and they were primarily, we had officers out on the street who were getting whipped, and other officers were not going to their aid, and this has been our main this thing.
Well, in reference to this particular meeting, the only comment I want to make about it is that we've met, we've talked. I consider it fruitful and constructive, and I'm optimistic about what was talked about and resolved, and have no further comments. Okay.
Thank you. On camera.
I think concerns were expressed, and many of those will be resolved. I'm convinced at this point it was a constructive, fruitful meeting.
I think that after the disturbance started, we had police officers who went down on the ground and were getting kicked, and the other officers did not go to their aid. And this is something that upset us a whole lot.